Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are located. And welcome to the Center for International Higher Education. My name is Gerardo Blanco, and I serve as the academic director here at CIHE in Boston College. And today, I'm really delighted to welcome you all to this webinar organized in collaboration with the Observatory on Higher Education Transformations, in which the Higher School of Economics has a leading role, and we're very happy to offer this joint webinar. I'm going to provide a little bit more context, but before I go any further, I just wanted to share with you that today we are offering interpretation into Russian. So all you need to do is to go to the bottom menu on your Zoom window and select the interpretation option with the globe icon, and you should be able to select the audio. You can switch back and forth, but we are very excited to offer this feature today. So one more word on housekeeping. We ask you that you please keep your cameras off and your microphones muted, please, because we want to provide our undivided attention to our stellar presenters today. And as well, we ask that you type your questions using the chat function. The advantage of doing this is that you don't need to wait until the end of the presentation. You can type your questions as you are thinking them. And another innovation that we are offering today is if you prefer to type your question in Russian, we will have one of our colleagues in CIHE translating those into English. So welcome once again. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Today, it really is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar entitled International Student Recruitment and Mobility in Non-Anglophone Countries, Theories, Themes, and Patterns. And the presenters today include our very own Professor Hans de Witt here in the Center for International Higher Education, who will be joining us a little later. I'm also very happy to welcome Ekaterina Minaeva from the Higher School of Economics in Russia. I'm also joined by Hakan Ergin from Istanbul University. And also rounding up this group of presenters, we also have our very own Lizhou, Wang, here from the Center for International Higher Education. If we go to the next slide, please. We really want to remind you that this entire webinar is organized around a new book, which we are very excited to share with all of you. And you can get this book with a 20% discount if you wish. The link to this book is going to be also in the chat, so we encourage you to check it out. And without any further ado, welcome you once again. Thank you for joining us. And Katia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. Let me start with the words of gratitude to Center of International Higher Education and to Hans de Witt particularly for initiating this project and for support, guidance, and all the help that we received along the way. And let me tell you a little bit about the rationales behind this project. When we started this project, it was 2020, so we launched it before the pandemic. However, the last 2 years only proved the relevance of the topic because we see that there are global challenges that are only increasing, especially during these 2 years. First of all, these are geopolitical developments and tensions, and of course, increased competition for global talent, especially since global economy and digital economy are developing at the sonic speed. Then global health concerns, sustainability and environmental issues, other sustainable development goals. And as well, we can see the issues with the rise of nationalism and racism in different countries. And all these and other global factors are hindering international student mobility from one hand, but from another hand, student mobility and internationalization of higher education can be a good response to these challenges. And what we also saw during these 2 years is that a global map of student mobility is changing, and it is prognosed that international student flows will be changing as well. And high income and even middle income non-Anglophone countries are expected to be more active. Also, like English-speaking countries as well, in their activities in attracting international students. And in this regard, non-Anglophone countries actually may have some advantages. For example, it is expected that some students will prefer not to travel very far from home and to study within their global region at least. So this is a certain advantage. However, still many non-Anglophone countries do not have the same experience in attracting international students, and they also have other barriers to overcome, such as language barrier. So for them, the initiatives on student recruitment can be really much more challenging. And understanding their recruitment opportunities and challenges is really crucial, not just because it's really crucial, not just because it affects their competitiveness, but also because it affects their experiences of international students as well. I will tell now a little bit about the structure of the book and the focus of the project. So we covered several main themes, main topics. We did a review of international student mobility as a global phenomenon. And an overview of key actors in international student recruitment, so to say, an ecosystem with a lot of interesting actors and interesting initiatives that are able to enrich experiences of international students and help institutions as well. And also our colleagues did a reflection on the role of English as a medium of instruction, since it's a major topic in international student recruitment discourse for several decades already. We covered several regions. We covered several countries in Europe: France, Germany, the Netherlands, Romania, Russia, and Turkey. Also, there are several cases for Asian countries: China, India, Japan, Malaysia, and South Korea. And we also looked at Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, MENA region, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, based on the takeaways and insights of thematic overviews and country cases, we developed a set of recommendations for non-Anglophone countries for their for development of their policies, national policies, institutional strategies, maybe some things to look at in terms of developing their programs and recognizing the goals of international student mobility for their particular countries and so on. Okay, so now I will pass, I will give the floor to my colleague, Wang. She's a PhD student at the Center for International Higher Education at Boston College and one of the editors of the book. Jo, please.
So, hello, everybody. For the next 10 minutes, I will present the China chapter on behalf of my colleague, Professor Wen from Tsinghua University in China. In this chapter, Professor Wen and I reviewed international education and international student recruitment in China, including an overview of the higher education system and the historical development in international education. We reviewed regulations and policies that have impacted international mobility. We evaluate key actors, stakeholders, and examined recent data on student trends up until the global pandemic. In this presentation, I will give a brief overview of what the China chapter contains. To start with, China occupies a very unique position in the global student mobility market. China has long been the top supplier of international students worldwide. And now, as a non-English speaking country and also still a developing country, China has become the world's third most popular destination for almost 500,000 international students before the pandemic. It's only after the US and the UK in terms of international student recipients. This certainly shows the result of China's recent internationalization of higher education effort and strategies to recruit international students and to increase China's global influence, economic development, international engagement, and soft power. As a centralized political economy, the central government maintains the power in terms of policy design, funding, and quality assurance. But individual institutions has the power to operate international education in terms of recruitment, curriculum and pedagogy, finance, and administration. Among all government policies that affect international student education, there are two sets of policies that are especially influential. The first is that China has invested heavily in promoting world-class universities through a set of initiatives such as the 211 project, 985 project, and the most recent double first class initiatives. Those are the excellence initiatives which require a university to recruit more international students to increase its ranking. And secondly, China actively participates in various multilateral and bilateral international activities, such as the Belt and Road Initiative. There are education action plans embedded in these international initiatives, which allocate scholarships to foreign students and incentivizes individual institutions to attract more and more international students. Next page, please. Here we provide a picture on international students in China. Over the past decades, all figures relating to international student mobility in China has gone up, including the total number of students, total number of scholarship recipients, and the number of higher education institutions hosting international students. In 2018, the most recent data shows over 50% of international students in China are degree seekers, which reflect China's enhanced education quality and reputation in scientific research. If we look at where those students are studying, we see that they are highly concentrated in mega cities, such as Beijing and Shanghai, and in coastal areas that are economically more developed. International student ratios are higher in three types of institutions. Firstly, the research-intensive universities. Secondly, in international branch campuses, such as NYU Shanghai. And thirdly, in medical institutions. We see a variation in recent trends in disciplinary choices. So we used to see a lot of international students come to China for short term and to study Chinese language and literature. However, when we break the data down, we see that for long-term degree seekers, Chinese language is only the fourth most popular major after engineering, medicine, and management. For doctoral candidates pursuing a degree in China, the top majors are engineering, management, economics, and medicine. We also see a change in top sending countries over the past few years. If you look at the picture on the right side here, you can see that international students are concentrated from neighboring countries and the Belt and Road Initiative countries surrounding China. On the contrary, the number of students from higher income Western countries have decreased over the past few years. Next page, please. Over the past 4 decades, since China's reform and open up, Chinese economy has grown at the world's fastest rate, and Chinese government continues to provide various scholarships to international students. We have identified that as the major pull factors for attracting international students into studying in China. China also has a comparative advantage in higher education, especially when compared with Belt and Road Initiative countries, and especially in the STEM fields. The third strength is that China offers a very safe, secure, and protective social environment for international students. The crime rate in China is extremely low. There are a few weaknesses. Number one is that China has focused on increasing the quantity of international students over quality. The most alarming concern now is the relatively low standard and admission requirements, especially for local institutions, but not the case for top research universities. Secondly, Chinese universities have not diversified their promotion and marketing approaches as many competitors have done. The institutions are limited in their practices of using social media or holding on-campus open days. Thirdly, the overall internationalization of higher education level on campus are relatively low. This is an inherent problem. The management and administration in China are more about managing students rather than serving them. In our interviews, students report low assistance in counseling, interpersonal communication, and career guidance. The fourth weakness in international student education is that international students are unevenly distributed across Chinese higher education institutions and in a few regions only. We also see major threats. The number one is how current geopolitical tensions poses challenges to international mobility. And related to that is that we see the long existing gap between China and the West seem to have widened. Relating to that, despite China's effort in Belt and Road Initiative regions to increase soft power, recent research has shown that China's higher education is not well perceived in those countries. China's strategy and ability to share its stories has not been particularly effective. There are many factors contributing to the problem, including China's tight control in higher education. Of course, we also see a few areas of opportunities. Firstly, we see there's potential to increase the number of students at graduate level. Secondly, the regional cooperation may help advance student mobility. Asia has a thriving economy, which require substantial talent collaboration and technical support. Thirdly, China has a quick response to COVID and moved fast to online education, which might help attract international students to distance learning. And lastly, while many Western higher education institutions have been cutting down staff and freezing faculty hiring, on the China side, faculty hiring are less affected by the pandemic. This measure might not directly reverse brain drain problem, but perhaps will slow it down by bringing back young researchers and faculty members who are educated and trained overseas. Foreign educated scholars will take positions in Chinese institutions, universities, and enhance the overall quality and reputation of Chinese higher education in the long run. Such improvement may help attract more international students. So for 10 minutes, that's a very brief summary of the China chapter. Please send any questions in the chat box. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. And I'll be next, and I'll talk a little bit about the Russian case that we also analyzed in the book. And let me start with saying that Russia, in Soviet times, Russia was the third major recipient of international students. But at that time, the rationales for international student mobility and internationalization of higher education in general were mostly political, and their goal was mostly soft power. And after the Soviet Union collapse, for almost 2 decades, internationalization and student mobility as a part of it was overlooked. and only educate before this date, we started developing new initiatives on the institutional level. However, the first serious initiative at the federal level was the federal project Education Expert that was launched only in 2017. And the target was to attract more than 700,000 international students to Russia by 2025. While this is an ambitious goal and not likely to be reached in such a short period of time, still we see the growth of number of international students. And since 2013, the number of international students nearly doubled in Russia and did not decrease during the last year, so was not exactly affected by the pandemic. Russia is the seventh largest recipient of international students now. And most of our students come from Kazakhstan, China, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and so on. So you may notice that many of these countries are post-Soviet countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, Belarus, and so on. And this is actually one of the challenges. I will stop on this later in detail, but now more than 60% of our international students are Russian-speaking students, which cannot be called internationalization in its full sense, but still it contains some aspects of it. And we still have more than 30% of international non-Russian speaking students, mostly from China, but also from India, from Africa, from Middle East, and so on. And speaking about the professions and speaking about the study fields, of international students, healthcare is the most popular among all others, and it's followed by economic and management, humanities, Russian language studies, education, law, and so on. However, in the past few years, we've also launched programs on Arctic exploration, oil and gas, and in other fields where Russia is traditionally strong. So this is also a growing field of interest. Like in China, there is a challenge that is related to a distribution of international students, because most of our students study in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and also in some regions on the borders, bordering with other countries. However, the central part of Russia is still overlooked. There are some strong institutions that are very active in attracting international students. However, still the ratio is quite uneven. And talking about the quality of recruitment, there are also challenges to meet, because most of international students apply to universities with not a very high requirements for GPA and so on. So of course, some high-ranked universities such as Higher School of Economics, Moscow State Universities are very active in attracting international students as well. But the main share of international students still apply to universities with lower admission requirements. And another interesting fact is that even though Russian universities are, especially in the last years, are really interested in developing international master programs and attracting students of the master level, however, the share of international students studying at master programs is really low, both in comparison with students of bachelor degrees and if we will compare it with the share of master students in other countries. So this is still a challenge for for student mobility in Russia. Talking about strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities, I'd like to start with strong sides, and one of the strongest sides of Russian higher education is quality of education in selected study fields. For example, in healthcare, the reason why students, we have many Indian students studying healthcare sciences, also students from post-Soviet countries and other countries as well, because not just because of low tuition fees, which is also an advantage, but also because of the high quality and methods of teaching specifically for these professions. Also, there is a competitive quality of education and reputation within the region. I mean, CIS countries, low tuition and accommodation fees, especially speaking about accommodation, their price is really close to nothing. And also there is no language barrier for students from CIS countries, which of course, is disadvantage from one side, but it allows Russia to recruit a lot of these students without developing specific internationalization policies and measures for integrating them into study environment. Talking about weaknesses, the biggest weakness of Russian internationalization strategy in terms of student mobility is lack of clearly defined goals. Which is what I mean by that is that we can see how we can see the goals of other countries in attracting international students. For example, in Germany, based on the policies, it is quite obvious that the goal is talent attraction because the education is free for international students, but the entry requirements are really high for most institutions. In the UK and in Australia, the main rationale was tuition revenue, was financial rationale from tuition revenue and other sources, but recently it has slightly moved to talent attraction as well. But for Russia, it is really challenging to define a specific goal, and therefore, without a specific target for international student recruitment, we miss certain opportunities in each of the targets in getting tuition revenue and in getting talents and so on. And mostly almost all other weaknesses come from that's low diversification of educational products and unexplored competitive advantages in specific regions. Also barriers for international students at the labor market, since talent attraction is not exactly recognized as main goal for student mobility. Lack of comprehensive internationalization strategies at the institutions, and also I would add low level of internationalization in institutions in central part of Russia, but also sometimes even in metropolitan cities. And of course, last but not the least, that's language barrier. Talking about threats, I would point out that, I would point out the low diversification of export markets and too much reliance on Russian-speaking students. This is really a challenge since for example, for Kazakhstan, for Ukraine, for other Russian-speaking markets, there are also other competitors such as China, European countries, and so on. And also, many students now speak English quite fluently. So so Russian language stops being an advantage in a way. So we need to develop more initiatives for non-Russian speaking students. Otherwise, we may lose the significant share of our international students. Then there are missed opportunities for talent engagement. This is mostly related to immigration policies and procedures, but also lack of instruments in institutions to provide a smooth transition from the university to the job market. And finally, there is an inconsistency between policies, laws, regulations, academic standards, and cultures, and also inconsistency between different actors, because it is often, in many cases, it happens that universities have their own strategy for internationalization, and policy regulations are focused on different things. And talking about opportunities, one of them is creating initiatives for regional cooperation. This can be really an interesting way to increase the number of international students, for example, developing double degree programs with our partners from CIS countries and so on. Then policies to increase international visibility of institutions. This is also an important one, and providing a smooth transition to the job market for international students. This certainly would help to reach the goal of talent attraction. But I would also add that in Russia, like in China, during the past 2 years, the switch to online learning happened comparatively fast and comparatively successful. So this may be also an opportunity. And I will talk a little bit about that for 1 more minute, if I may. And I wanted to highlight the changes in international student mobility in Russia during the pandemic. And when we were looking at reactions in different institutions, we found several interesting trends. First, universities tend to rely less on student recruitment agencies. And it may seem like not such a significant change. However, it is because since universities now have an opportunity to promote their programs online and reach international students directly, they prefer to do this way without involving education agencies. However, they now are looking at their own brand, so to say, at their own image, at their own marketing strategies. So this brings them to reconsider how they communicate with their prospective students, what can they offer to them, and that in some cases brings institutions to reconsider their strategy of work with international students altogether. Also, there is more interest in international cooperation and development of double degree programs, but I guess that can be said about many countries. And also another interesting thing about a Russian education expert sector is the success of private companies in online education at foreign markets. The income of Russian edtech at the foreign markets in 2020 reached $13 million US, which is higher than the income from tuition revenue in higher education institutions. That can be explained also by the fact that these programs for international students were designed to be delivered online, and the entire system, marketing, work with students, communication, study environment, all this was developed for this purpose, for digital format. But now we see that some universities are cooperating with private edtech companies and develop joint degree programs. So there is a promising opportunity that maybe some of these practices will transition from the private sector to higher education institutions. So this is all I wanted to share with you on the Russian case. And now I give the floor to Hakan Ergin from Istanbul University, who will highlight the findings about the case of Turkey.
Thank you, Katya. Hello, colleagues. Greetings from Istanbul. Before I start, I would like to thank Katya, Joe, and Hans for editing such an excellent book. And of course, again, Hans for leading this book project. They spent most of their time recently on editing this book. So thank you so much for this. And also CIHE, my second home, thank you so much for organizing such an event. Next, please, Katya. Well, in the book, in my chapter, I focused on degree-seeking inbound international students in Turkish higher education. First of all, I want to give an overview of the change in the number of incoming international students in Turkish higher education. As we see in the last couple of decades, there is a continuous increase in the number of international students in Turkey. In 1983, it was around 5,000, and right now it is climbing over 200,000. There are several reasons behind this increase, but maybe two main reasons might be attracting international students and physical mobility, especially hosting more and more students is right now a government policy here in Turkey. In some strategy papers and other documents related to internationalization, it is explicitly stated that attracting more and more students to Turkish higher education is necessary for generating some income from their tuition fees, and also especially soft power from the region, neighboring countries especially. And also the other main reason is, of course, the war in Syria. As you know, because of the ongoing war in Syria, over 6 million Syrians moved to other countries, and almost 4 million Syrians came to Turkey. And Turkey has an open door policy. And since the crisis started 10 years ago, Turkey has been providing these Syrian refugees with humanitarian aid, including and access to higher education in Turkey. So the number of Syrian refugee students is also increasing day by day in the system. Most of these international students are enrolled in medical school, some economics programs, and also some literature programs mostly. And next, please, Katya. So if we have a look at top 10 maybe origins of international students in Turkey, we see that 1 in every 4 international students is a Syrian refugee. And if we have a look at the others as well, we see that almost half of all the international students come from 4 countries: Syria, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and Iraq. And if we have a look at these top 10 countries, we can also infer that Turkey is mostly good at attracting international students from neighboring countries and also some Turkic countries like Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan, and also some Muslim countries like Iran, Iraq, Somalia as well. Well, some research about international students in Turkey show us that especially some Muslim countries in the region see Turkey as a modern European Muslim country, so that they would like to choose Turkey as a destination. Next, please, Katya. So in my chapter, I also provided a SWOT analysis of this inbound international student mobility in Turkish higher education. So speaking of the strengths, maybe I can say that, of course, geographical location of Turkey is a plus. Some research about international students in Turkey shows that some of them see Turkey as a transfer point. They would like to get their bachelor's degree and then they would like to move to Europe to continue their graduate education. And also, lying on both continents, Europe and Asia, Turkey is close to the Middle East and also some North African countries and other countries in the region, some Asian countries. So this is why it is popular among international students. And also, low cost of education and living is another plus. Well, compared to other tuition fees in some English-speaking destinations, tuition fees are quite economical. Maybe just a couple of thousands of tuition fee per year would be enough to study at a medical school for an international student here in Turkey. And another plus is, of course, as I said, we have 207 universities and 8 million students in our system, which is one of the largest in the European higher education area. And internationalization is a government policy, and the Council of Higher Education from the capital city coordinates all internationalization processes. So it is always on the top of agenda in higher education. So universities are always encouraged to attract more and more international students, which is another advantage, I think. Of course, speaking of the weaknesses, as I said, we have a centralized system, and sometimes I think it is a little bit over-centralized because from the capital city, all universities are given the same roadmap to follow. And each university, you know, sometimes has some different university culture, different history, and they have various departments. So it might be a little bit difficult for each university to follow the same roadmap. And also, for the first time, an internationalization strategy was published in 2018, and it was for the following 5 years until the end of 2022. So I think we need a medium run and maybe a longer run strategy as well. One of the drawbacks in the system is we also get this feedback from international students here. We have quite small number of English taught programs compared to some maybe European countries as well. Well, This is a drawback because some students complain about not being taught in some English-speaking programs because sometimes they are not willing to learn Turkish. So this is, I think, one of the barriers that we need to overcome. And speaking of opportunities, of course, we have a couple of opportunities. I just want to talk about a couple of them here. Luckily, in the strategy paper, the government would like to increase the number of English taught programs. So there are some special programs to increase the number of English-speaking academics here at several universities, which is quite promising. And health coverage, I think one of the most advantageous aspect of Turkish higher education, because we experienced this during the pandemic. Compared to some countries, maybe health coverage is quite cheap, and also it is for free for some international students who hold a government scholarship, and others can just pay a couple of dollars and they can have a health service from public hospitals. I think which is quite a plus, quite an important plus while choosing a destination to study for international students. And digital internationalization is another good aspect of Turkish higher education. Turkey is one of the main providers of open education in the world. Right now, in our open education system, there are over 4 million students and a couple of thousands of international students. As we see, right after the pandemic, maybe digital internationalization will become more and more popular, and this might be another promising aspect for our education system. And of course, there are some threats for Turkish higher education about attracting more and more international students. One is the economic instability we are facing these days, unfortunately. It is quite difficult to estimate if universities will increase their tuition fees in the upcoming years. Because these days the prices of everything, rents and other expenses in Turkey is unfortunately rising. So it is quite difficult to estimate this. And there are other, of course, conflicts in the region. In Syria, the war is ongoing, and in Iraq, there are still some, problems. So when I attend some international fairs about mobility, I see that some countries would like to attract some students from Turkey, but they are not willing to send their which is, I think, a serious threat for Turkey, which might maybe harm the safety and maybe a modern image of Turkey in the eyes of some international students. And another threat might be the weakening of the European Union and Turkey relations. As you know, Turkey has been struggling for becoming a member of the European Union in the last 50 years. And recently, it seems that the Turkish government is tired of dealing with these issues, and compared to the past, there are no more serious negotiations between the two parties. So this might also be another barrier for attracting international students from the European countries, and also it might harm the image of Turkey in the eyes of international students as a modern European Muslim country. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Hakan and Joe and Katja, for your presentations. And as maybe has been announced, I was a little bit late because I had to get my booster shot in time, but now I'm there and I can also present the conclusions, recommendations of our study. As you have heard, we had these 3 case studies from Russia and China and Turkey. And it's of course clear that we always have a contextual situation where we have to keep in mind when we talk about international student mobility and recruitment that every context is different. But we also try to come to some general conclusions and recommendations, even between the more case studies that we have from countries like the Netherlands and France in Europe, compared to countries like Turkey and Russia and China and Malaysia and South Africa. Of course, also keeping in mind that some have much more stronger English presence than other ones, like India and Malaysia and South Africa, where in other cases the English language was not present before, but has become an important part. But still, overall, what we have seen in the countries that we have analyzed is that many countries have established national policies and practices and use competitive tuition fee policies compared to most of the more English-speaking countries. In particular, what in a recent study by the British Council and study portal has been called the Big Four, United States, Canada, UK, and Australia. They are much more expensive than most of the countries that we have been addressing. They have adjusted their immigration regulations to make it more possible for international students to come. They use opportunities for regional collaboration, as you have seen also in the cases that we have been discussing from Russia and Turkey in particular. Most of the international students come from regional countries. They have designed more competitive and diversified education programs, and several of them have offered programs in other languages than the national language, in particular into English. So that are some of the characteristics that we have, and they make, in many cases, use of their specific advantages. So the position in the region, regional partnerships, low tuition fees, etc., to attract more international students. That is something which we see in many cases. India, for example, is a clear case that they use much more different policies to attract more students from neighboring countries and from Africa, for instance. But there are many challenges as well. At the national level, most of the countries lack marketing strategies for specific markets. The lack of funding, the lack of alignment with the higher education sector when the government is setting a policy, and they also lack alignment between the different actors, between the different ministries, between the different institutions. There's not a kind of coherent marketing strategy that in place all the actors. It might be either the government that is very active, or a specific institution might be active, or a specific ministry, but a coherent national strategy in most cases is lacking. At the institutional level, the most common challenge is low-level comprehensive internationalization and services on the campuses. So international students are seen as something ad hoc and separated from the rest of the institution. You create separate programs for them. You try to see how we can deal with services, but there's not really a comprehensive strategy to align the local students and faculty community and the local offer of programs with those for international students. And most of the non-Anglophone countries have underexplored opportunities. There's still very much room for further developing regional academic cooperation, involving of different actors and diversifying educational products. And based on that, we have set a series of recommendations. And next slide, please. The first one is non-Anglophone countries need clearly to identify which types, levels, and study areas would be the best fit for their particular circumstances. So not try to have a comprehensive marketing strategy like the Big Four can do. They can afford probably to have both undergraduate and graduate level. They can have it all kind of disciplines, etc. But they have to be focused on what in their context is specific, the level, the type, and the study areas that they were focusing on. They have to make an internal and external context analysis to identify the key pull factors for international degree-seeking students. So they have to identify why are international students coming to our specific country, and to our specific institutions and programs. That is still in many cases lacking. They have also defined the key rationales for wanting to engage in international students recruitment of students. We see that there is not always a clear rationale why they do it. It might be either for reasons of income generation, it might be for soft power, which we see in many countries, by the way, happening, India, China, to some extent Russia, many others have a very soft power. They want to position their higher education and the country in the international environment. But you have to be much more defined about why are you doing this. Next slide, please. They should also define clearly what types of international students they want to target and develop their policies and scholarship schemes accordingly. It is in general too broad. We want to have international students, but what type of international students do you think you can target and want to target? Is that students from high income country, from high income families in particular? Is it students that are really much more aspiring to get a career in the country, or is it much more that students want to have a reputation degree? So defend again, the type is very important. Identify which fields of study prospect international will apply for and what types of institutions based on national strength. So don't try to sell the whole country, but try to say, well, what kind of study fields do we think that international students in particular think are recommended for certain country? For instance, you can take India again as a potential for the IT sector, or that is important. The type of institutions might be either more research universities or University of Applied Science or specialized institutions. That's also important to keep in mind. Then be realistic in your geographical focus as non-Anglophone countries. We have seen in the cases in particular of Russia and Turkey, but to a large extent also in China, that neighboring countries are the most realistic ones you can attract. And then there is the challenge that countries say, yeah, but we want to have a broader scope. China becomes then a very interesting one for many countries. But you see that you can also look differently. Both China and India attracting a lot of students from Africa and see it as a potential there to be much more present in that region. Diversing in recruitment markets is very important, because we even see in the Big Four and in other English-speaking countries that they are becoming too much dependent on students, in particular from China and to a slightly lesser extent from India, and that's a high risk. So if you are starting your strategy for recruiting international students, you have to be careful that you don't think, well, China is also the big thing or India is the big thing and we should only focus on that. There might be a high risk for all kinds of reasons, economic reasons, political reasons, etc., that you are then becoming in danger. So have a very clear geographical policy. Where do we want to focus on? What is the right strategy to do? Next slide. Language. Countries and institutions need to develop a language policy based on the why, for whom, local and international students, and for which program it's relevant to give priority to the local language, to English or other language instruction. I mean, it's a big debate. There is this tendency to say, well, we have to teach in English because otherwise we will not be able to develop, to recruit international students. And the recent study by the British Council and Study Portal seems to support that tendency, that there is an increasing development, in particular of English taught programs in the Asian region. You can question if that is really a wise policy to always do. You have to define again why you have been doing that. I mean, there might be more reason sometimes to have a focus on other language. There was also some discussion about, is Chinese language becoming much more important in Africa? You can question that, and you can also question if English in the long run will continue to be the dominant second language of instruction in the world, and also the first language of instruction in the world. But you have to be much more clearer about that. I would say the simply going into English is not always a good solution. It might be counterproductive when you don't have enough good quality faculty to teach in English, when you don't have local students who have enough knowledge about English, and when also many of your international students have not English as their primary language, then it has an enormous negative impact on the quality of your delivery of education. So be careful that you first know what you are doing when you are teaching in other language than your own language. And we see that still lacking in many countries, a clear policy on that. Affordability is a key in the decision-making of international students. As mentioned, the big four are very expensive. It's a comparative advantage to be cheaper. At the same time, we also know that students look at rankings as a reference point for making recruitment. So then the English-speaking countries come much to the forefront, but you have also a lot of students go to France, to Germany, and to other countries, China growing very much. So then affordability for those students who can not afford the expensive programs, then affordability is an advantage, and providing scholarships and a less costly education offer is a pathway to recruit international students. As also we see that the opportunities to have a job market after graduation can be an important pull factor to attract international students. So that's also issues that have to be much more developed. Dedicated facilities and services before and upon student arrival and during their studies are crucial to guarantee retention and also further recruitment. So an international integration of international students with the local peers is also pivotal for a strategy. To take again the example of one of the countries, the Netherlands, where there's a lot of debate, have we not been too active in recruiting international students? Now 23% of the total student population is international, where we don't have the facilities and the services for those students, accommodation being a very important aspect, but also that there's assistance increasingly from local students who say, well, those students take away not only our services, our access to accommodation, but also lowering the quality of what you are doing. So be careful that you also address those issues very carefully. Next slide, please. You have to actively promote educational system among target sending countries. It's very important that other countries where you go to recruit students know what is available and what are the strengths and the weaknesses and the opportunities to make it attractive. So do a lot of promotion of educational systems. That's what has been the strength of the main countries that now are receiving international students. And if you really want to be effective, you have to have an active promotion. And we see that several countries have been doing that. For instance, the Netherlands Educational Support Services, the NASOs in the Netherlands, were an active success factor in the recruitment of international students. And now the government has been started to close them down, and because of the fact that they think that we have been over successful in that operation. So, but still, it is important to have those recruitments, policies, promotions taking place. Establish policies on the use of and monitoring of national agencies and public and private agencies in target sending countries. So be careful that you don't depend completely on external contractors, particularly in the private sector, without guaranteeing that there is a good quality, that they are ethically well. That's very important. So agents are unavoidable these days, but you have to be clear on your policies on that and not just simply depending on them, because otherwise there might be all kinds of challenges. International alumni policies are a very important part of your the recruitment strategy. Use those alumni to promote your systems, use those in your recruitment strategies in all kind of ways. That's still lacking in most countries. Some good examples are, again, for instance, the Netherlands. And governments and institutions should not ignore the potential of niche markets, such as prospective immigrants, refugees, specific ethnic groups with whom they relate, or the diaspora. Again, Turkey is a good example in respect to refugees and the policy of the government with respect to Syrian refugees. That is an important aspect as well. Diaspora is an important opportunity also for countries like India, etc. So try to see if you can have a more active policy to those specific niche markets as part of your overall strategy. Next slide. So you must complement your traditional student mobility activities with innovations and programs, offerings, and delivery methods. So you have to be taking the opportunity, and Hakan, for instance, for Turkey related to that, to see, can you diversify your opportunities to recruit international students, online offerings, branch campuses, franchise operations, institutional partnerships, all those kind of factors might be an important additional factor in your international recruitment. We have seen that countries like Germany, France, Russia, they have been very active in developing recently all kind of branch campuses and institutional partnerships. And of course, thanks to the pandemic, we have had much more experience with online learning as an opportunity as well. Create pathways for international students to gain work experience and recover part of their investment. Policies related to during study also get work experience is very important and still lacking in many countries or limited very much in countries. And develop a national policy for international student recruitment, building on own rationales, objectives, and needs. So use the data that you have to inform your policies. Don't go into a strategy without really having a clear analysis of and also evaluating constantly what you're doing. It's an ongoing process. Contexts change both in the country itself, but also in other countries. And you have to adapt to that. And you have to see what are your what opportunities are you missing, but also what challenges do you have to address. That is very important. So engage all the different actors in your country in a smooth and transparent communication as part of your overall strategy to avoid that you are missing the boat or you're doing something completely wrong while the context has immediately changed as well. So these are, I think, the recommendations that we have for you, and we look forward further to the discussion. I saw already several comments and questions, so looking forward to that debate as well. Thank you very much. Oh no, sorry. See, yeah, that's close. Because this is well, maybe as a last remark, we have to address, and it was implicit already in everything, that to address serious ethical and social consequences of international student recruitment. It is not possible to do it without keeping that in mind. And in doing so, the engagement of national agencies and student recruitment enriches the global market, but helps to establish more diverse policies. But there is a quite risk to doing that. So have an approach that is strategic and operational in the framework of comprehensive internationalization. Not be primarily driven by rationales of revenue generation, soft power, and rise in the rankings, but also look into what does it mean for your institution? What does it mean for your students? What does it mean for your faculty? So being driven primarily by economic rationale, soft powers, and rise in the rankings is unrealistic for most non-Anglophone countries, in particular the low and middle income countries, and will contribute to further global inequality and exclusion of systems, institutions, and individuals. That is what we have to keep in mind. So don't let yourself driven in copying what the main Anglophone countries are doing, but develop your strategy based on your needs and your interest, and be ethical and social and responsible in that whole effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of our presenters. We have a very healthy period of about 25 minutes for Q&A, which I'm very happy to facilitate. And Katja, would it be possible perhaps to take down the sharing? Excellent. So that way we are able to broadcast all of you in the panel. And let me, before we go any further, begin with an apology, because we certainly, even with the 25 minutes that we have, are not going to have enough time to get through all of these very interesting questions, and that's fine. It's better to have too many than too few, and this is just the nature of these events. But the good news is that we have a very high quality and quantity of questions. So let me just jump right in, because one of the points, first, let me acknowledge the fact that we have a very interesting conversation going on in the chat related to politics. Of course, I want to thank all of our presenters for focusing on the substance of our webinar. Of course, we could be discussing completely only the contextual elements and not focus on the higher education issues. And I know that you are having a very difficult balance to make. So first of all, let me start with that. But I think one of the issues that illustrates the tensions that we have several questions coming from David McCarty, from our colleague Isaac Fruman, as well as others. And I really think it connects with what Hans was talking about just a moment ago. Let's focus on the language of instruction. Why don't we focus, I think, across the different cases on the status of English? I think one of the questions was, well, what are some of the changes in the number of programs offered in English? And I think individually it's interesting, it's even more to look across cases. But let me add my own question to this. Isn't this one of those issues that exemplifies political changes in the context, right? I would say that in many cases, whether or not to choose offering a course or a program in English doesn't only respond to practical or pedagogical questions. Sometimes it also is influenced by a political context. So you don't have to agree with that second part of this statement, but I think it illustrates how we cannot separate the issues from the context. I'll open it up to all of you, because I think each of the cases would have a lot to contribute to this question. So the question again, the status of English as a language of instruction.
Yeah, maybe it would be good to have some example from the case studies. I've made my point clear that I mean, let's be honest, English as also in non-Anglophone countries, higher education system will continue to be an important factor. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, it will also be challenged increasingly more. For political reasons, there's a lot of relevant exchange on the political factor, indeed in the chat. Which I think is also for teaching in English a factor. There's a lot of resistance from nationalist, populist movements against the use of another language than the local language. So that's one factor. But there's also a more serious factor. Does it really make it possible to integrate the local and the international community into the campuses and into the learning environment, which I think is a serious problem. And I mentioned the case already of the Netherlands, where that is very much debated now, and universities who were actively promoting the recruitment of international students over the past 2 decades now suddenly complain to the government that they cannot stop it anymore. And the government has to help them to make it possible. So I think that reaction will be happening in other countries as well. In particular, I see that in countries like Denmark. I see it even in Germany, etc. So there might be much more that the English becomes much more another language of domination in Asia, as the British Council and Study Portal say that is the trend. But we have to see. I think also there will be some reactions against that, but maybe what the other think about.
Katia, I see that you're unmuted. Maybe you want to provide your contra perspective. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Gerardo. Thank you, Hans. I just wanted to add that probably the answer lays somewhere in the middle, because from one hand, it's really important to provide students and faculty with the opportunity to be a part of a global discussion. And most likely still the English will be the language of the global dialogue. And in fact, in Russia, we have sort of a challenge with non-English speaking faculty, and these professors are excluded from global dialogue, for example, and this is also quite a challenge. But from on another hand, I would say that for students who, like Hans said, indeed, it is a challenge for international students who do not speak Russian to integrate fully and to understand fully Russian culture, and also to be a part of a job market later. And I know that some institutions in Russia developed a policy where English-speaking programs have a higher tuition fee, and non-English speaking programs, Russian-speaking programs, Russian taught, are for free or have very low tuition fees, so that is up to a student. And also, I think Russian language studies are the third most popular study field for international students in Russia. So that's also that indicates an interest and desire to put some effort into studying Russian. But at the same time, maybe there are students who do not have time to study a complex language such as Chinese or Russian, and they also want to be a part of international student community, see a country, experience the culture. And so probably it is about having a choice how to study in the local language or in English.
Thank you. Joe, please go ahead if you had a comment on this.
Yes, I wish to add that in our book, each chapter country case actually contains a section discussing the language, the English language issue. Also, we have a chapter specifically on English as a language of instruction in non-Anglophone countries. Quickly add, the case in China is very similar to Russia, while the institutions are incentivized, even received government grant to offer EMI, English as a medium of instruction programs. Nevertheless, the Ministry of Education specifically stipulates the common language of PRC is Mandarin. So Chinese should be the primary teaching language for college and universities to train international students. In reality, is carried at different quality at different levels. And in our interviews, we see that students' satisfaction rate for all English courses is less than 50%. So there aren't enough good quality faculty instructors to teach in English language. So this is a very complicated matter. And please read our book.
And Gerardo, as a quick addition, may I please? Well, in Turkey, actually, English-speaking programs are quite popular, and just below 5% of all the programs are English-taught programs. Well, we have a quite centralized university entrance system. Every June, teenagers take a multiple choice test, and they get a score, and then with these scores, they choose a department. and the English taught programs mostly require higher and higher scores to let you get in these programs. I think there are two reasons behind the popularity of these English taught programs in Turkey. One is the social value, you know, because as a country which turned its face to Europe a century ago, speaking English is a social value. It means prestige and it means a high status. So people would like to study in these programs, and as Turkey attracts international students from the region, and mostly they think the same. Some qualitative and small scale research also shows that. And the second one is, as I said before, both local and some international students would like to move to another country when they get their degree from a Turkish university. So they believe that if they study at an English taught program or university, it means that their diploma will have a maybe greater recognition abroad.
Hakan, perhaps to stay with you, because one of the questions in the chat was very interesting, coming from our colleague Jessica Schuller. And she had a very specific question about the Turkish context, which is, what are some of the current policies for international students that go to Turkey and may want to perhaps work afterward? Are there, does the immigration law allows for something like this? What is the context for those who may be interested in remaining for some period of time after graduation in Turkey?
Sure. As a very clear and quick answer, I can say that first of all, we have two types of international students. One is traditional international students, and the second one is refugees. Speaking of traditional international students, a graduate international students can apply for a work permit, and all undergrad and graduate international students can apply for an extension of residence permit. Right after getting their diploma. In 10 days of time, they have to apply for it. And speaking of refugees, officially, according to United Nations, refugees are under temporary protection in Turkey. So they can already work and they don't have to apply for an extension of a residence permit.
Thank you very much. Hakan, maybe to stay with you for one more moment, since there were a number of questions, I'm trying to integrate them. But of course, we know simply from the news that currently there is a very difficult economic situation unfolding in Turkey as we speak. What do you think the consequences may be? On the one hand, of course, this will be challenging for funding universities, but on the other hand, from the attractive, right, when you have currency difference like the one that is unfolding right now in Turkey, it may actually become quite affordable to study in Turkey. So it may be a silver lining to a very challenging situation. Do you have any thoughts in relation to this economic crisis taking place?
Yeah, sure. I am also, as a citizen who lives here, you know, I have to follow all of these economic ongoing crises here. So there is a huge ongoing crisis, unfortunately. Last year, $1 United States dollars equal to 5 Turkish liras, and right now it is 15 Turkish liras. And unfortunately, this devaluation is going on. If you are an international student who is self-sponsored by a government or maybe by your family, and if you have some maybe US dollars or other currencies, it might be a good opportunity, because just paying a couple of thousands of US dollars per year, you can get a medical school degree here. You cannot do it in anywhere else, you know. However, the disadvantage here is there is an unpredictability. So no one can see the future. An international student can come here and he or she can stay here, but there is no guarantee that next year, who knows and how much he or she has to pay for the tuition fee, because the prices and cost of everything is increasing day by day here. And even as a citizen, I cannot know how much should I pay for the rent of my apartment. So it is quite unpredictable. This is a, I think, serious disadvantage.
Thank you very much, Hakan. Well, there were so many interesting points made throughout the presentation. One of them, I think, has motivated a couple of questions directed both to Joe and to Katya. So our colleague Marco Turk asked a few questions. Of course, apologies since we can't cover all of them, but the two questions, I think they're quite pertinent and I think really good for clarification because they refer directly to things that you both said in your presentations. So Joe, for you, the question is about this balance between quantity and quality. So the specific question in relation to this point that you made is, how can universities, particularly in the case that you and our colleague Wen studied in China, how can universities can overcome this sometimes almost obsession with quantity and really focus on quality improvement? And Katya, the question for you is specifically about, if you could say more about why you selected academic culture as one of the weaknesses in the Russian case. So if we can go to Joe and then Katya, I think these two questions would be very interesting and in response to points that you both made during your presentations. Joe, go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Professor Marco Turk. This is a great question and it's philosophical and complicated. I don't think I have a short answer for this question, but maybe I could offer some clarifying points in the Chinese case. I think many aspects of Chinese university functioning are associated with the academic mania, as you put it, on the pursuing quantity over quality dilemma. It affects the personnel arrangement, teaching pedagogy and daily administration in Chinese universities. In our interviews with Chinese faculty and administrators, they have experienced the burden of have to teach many international students who do not meet the admission standards or the level of domestic students. So that's very challenging for the instructors. On the other hand, the international students, they reported that there are not many good faculty and instructors who can teach in English or bilingual language. So we can see the tension is not just about increasing the student quantity, but also providing international student education at a fast speed without fully prepared for it. At the same time, the international education directors, they stated that the international student recruitment is a job that needs to be done because Chinese institutions need to be ranked higher and receive more government resource and recognition. This issue is, the quality issue is particularly salient in the China case because the top institutions in China are funded by the government, and we are in a top-down governing education system. So I don't think we have a quick solution to, or quick answer to your excellent question.
Thank you, Joe. Katya, why do you think that perhaps academic culture might be a weakness in the case that you analyzed?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Gerardo and Marco. I would like to point out that what I meant was not just academic cultures, but the gap between academic cultures. And what I implied by that is that still the academic culture in Russian universities, in general, the environment in Russian universities, the way of teaching, the approach to curriculum is, from one hand, not exactly internationalized, and sometimes it can be really a challenge for, well, it can be a challenge for international students to engage as quickly. But on another hand, there are some demands from the job market, from the growing standards of higher education, I mean teaching and so on, that are not exactly well, met in some Russian institutions. What I mean is the quality of education, because sometimes their programs are they need to be updated, for example. So what I mean by that is that international part of the academic culture and also the quality of teaching. Maybe that was not exactly clearly put.
Thank you. I think that helps provide a lot of context. So we are desperately running out of time here. So rather than inviting an additional question, what I would like to do is to offer our panel an opportunity to maybe in 30 seconds to a minute, offer a final takeaway or thoughts that you would like our audience to leave with as we close. And to keep this very efficient and going, let me call out so that we can follow a particular order. So Hans, could we perhaps start with you?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for interesting discussion also in the chat. I think, let me briefly respond to also Philip Alba's comment, which got a lot of support, that we didn't address in the three cases so much the political context, the political factors, the development of authoritarianism. You can add to that geopolitical tensions in the world, which also impact enormously the pandemic itself, climate change, all kinds of topics that we have to address. As a kind of excuse, you can say, well, we started this book before COVID-19, and before that, for instance, all the geopolitical tensions became much more dominant in higher education impact. We tried to address it still during the final process of the editing of the book, and there's some reference for it. But of course, it's very clear that political factors play an important role. So we should not say that that's not a factor, and we address it in several of our chapters as well, and that how the world will see in the coming years is very unpredictable these days. But tendencies to authoritarianism, as mentioned in the United States, for instance, might also have a negative impact on the situation there. Like also Brexit had an enormous negative impact on the UK, and so we have to keep that in mind. But most important message is this is a very important and fascinating topic, which is context related to each countries, and you have to read the whole book to get a very clear overview of the different cases and see that it is both in the high income countries and between the low and mid income countries quite different how they approach things, and that makes it so fascinating because you have to learn from that what is the right approach that you as specific country and as institution in a specific country has to do with respect to international student and recruitment. So advocate the book, please order it now. There's a 20% discount if you do it now. So go ahead and read it, and then we will be happy to continue the conversation based on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hans. Joe, a final word?
Yes, I would like to end on a more optimistic note. Although we have seen the international student education in the China case has not achieved the expected diplomatic or soft power goals, it has nonetheless cultivated students who has the linguistic skill, soft skill, technical skill for the Global South countries and Belt and Road Initiative countries. We've seen many students return to their home countries and worked in organizations relating to bilateral or multilateral development. So in that aspect, international student education have indirectly improved regional cross-cultural communication and economic development. So it's an important topic, and I do believe such education should be encouraged.
Thank you very much, Joe. Hakan, do you have some closing comments, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Gerardo. Well, again, I'll keep optimistic. Maybe we have been a little bit paused by this ongoing pandemic, but I am optimistic about the future of internationalization. It has lots of benefits, and people will enjoy these benefits of transnational mobility in the future, right after the pandemic as well. So I would like to finish My last words with an oft-cited quotation by John Hadzik: internationalization is not dead or coming to an end, but rather continue to evolve. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakan. Katya, final word.
Yes, thank you. I'll be quick. I've spotted here in the comments that it is the entire discussion, of course, on geopolitical tensions and political issues. And one of the comments said that it is important to teach students to think independently. And what I would like to point out is that international student mobility is, this is exactly what international student mobility is doing. Because as an international student myself and working and conducting research among international students in Russia and from other countries, I can see how direct is the impact of the personal experience on a student's mindset, so that they can see for their own eyes what is happening. And I think it's really important for all countries, for China, for Russia, for the US, especially now in times of really active mass media and news thing going on, which is not always which do not always deliver constructive information. And so I think that this is really one of the responses at the individual level, and individual level is what brings quality to other levels, institutional, global, and so on.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all of our panelists and to all of you for joining us today in this webinar by the Center for International Higher Education and the Observatory on Higher Education Transformation. We wish you all a good rest of your evening or day, depending on where you're located. Thank you very much and take care.